Now that we've worked with drawing the mineral kingdom, the land formations and water and the sky, now we're going to start looking at doing plants. And of course the most prominent plant that we're going to work with is trees, because they add so much to every picture that you do. Please remember that I told you always to start with the ground line, so that's what we're doing here. And that just gives us an idea where the trees are going. Now I could have done a nice hill and had trees on the hill, but I'm going to start with some very basic trees for right now. So let me make that, so you can see that ground line. I'm going to turn it into a grassy place, okay? So it's just a little grassy meadow. Please notice I take the crayon right off the edge, and that's why it's good to have a pad. You take the crayon right off the edge of your, when you're drawing a landscape picture, you don't just stop it there. You take it right off the edge. And you can also take it, make it press a little harder right off the edge around the bottom and the corners. That somehow holds it as almost like a frame. I'll go over it with a little yellow. Now I wear out my yellows more than anything else. I guess it's because I like to put so much yellow in my pictures. Now I'll mention it now. When you're doing a picture like a landscape, after you have things situated the way that you like them, and your tree the way the hills, and maybe you have some animals or something in the sky, I suggest that you then go over your picture with Papa Bear yellow and put yellow over as much of it as you can. Just give it a veil of yellow. It will bring a luminosity to your drawing that might have been missed if you just left it with the colors that you had created. And I also want to suggest that you practice covering your whole page with color, and only leaving things white if the white really has a purpose in the picture. Otherwise, bring color to the whole page, and urge your children to do the same, because I think they will be very satisfied with the end results when there's the time and effort that has gone into drawing the picture will then glow with this finished picture with these veils of yellow to make them shine. Okay, so here's the ground line. Now we're going to plant a tree. Now, I will say it to you as I would say it to a child. We take our red, and you can use the corner of the red, in which case my crayon is so worn down, my corner is quite soft. And I'm going to plant I think I'll put 3 trees here, so you see 3 different kinds of trees. I'm going to plant a seed, okay? So you just plant your little seed there. And wherever they decide they want the tree, say if they have a hillside, like in this picture that we drew here, and we want to plant a tree, then what you can do is you can have them put their hand over the picture. Or maybe here's their tree. They can put their hand over their picture. They want their tree this big. Okay? They put their hand there and they say, oh, I like that there, or maybe I would rather have my tree up here. And they can play with it. And when they have it there, then they want it that big, and so that's where the seed would be planted. Okay, I'm planning on having my tree about this big, and this is where my seed is planted. Then I very lightly, and I'm using the red, very lightly, start going up from the seed, very lightly. And I have instead of having it full mama bear at this angle, I've got it more where this is perpendicular. That's the word, perpendicular to the ground line. So it goes up as a fine line, and this is the little sapling that appears, okay? And then I'm going to imagine where the sapling would grow to. Now maybe it's just a young tree that you want. If that's the case, this is all you have to do. Show a little bit where it attaches, where the roots are, where it connects to the ground. And always make it growing from the ground up. That's how seeds grow, from the ground up towards the sun. And it's not just a trunk that has branches coming off it, like our hand is perhaps, but that there's this wonderful organic branching out, like our veins, or like the way rivers flow. Okay, now I decide I want this tree a little bit stronger. So now I'm changing the angle from perpendicular to a slight angle that way, and it's therefore making the trunk a little wider, still keeping this nice flow. And of course I want to bring the roots out just a little bit. You don't want to have just the trunk sitting on the ground, because it will not look like it's growing there. You want to ground it. You want to give it little feet and just indicate the roots. And it goes up, and the branches are always going to be thinner than the trunk itself. So if you have a lot of branches, then go back and make that trunk more substantial. And you can see my tree aging just by the fact that the trunk is getting thicker. And now that the trunk is getting thicker, it's also branching out. It's got branches now that are... And you don't have to do branches, put all the thousands and thousands of branches and sub-branches out on your tree, particularly if it's a tree that's going to have a lot of greenery on it. If it's a winter tree, you might want to, just to show some branches and to show how bleak and cool it is without life forces. So that's probably, you don't need to go any more than that. And I've got my trunk wide. Here you see it's almost as wide as Mama Bear. And then the branches themselves, and this is what I was showing you, that gesture, remember? Where you have the broader, and then you turn your crayon as you're moving out, and it gets thinner. Okay? This is where now I go over with my yellow. And I warm up that red, and I make it orangey. And as far as I'm concerned, that makes a lovely bark color. If you want to have it browner for a specific reason, not just because you know that bark is brown, but because you really want that brown quality in your picture, then add a little blue to it. Okay, so that's a lovely tree. I think I'd like to climb up in that tree. Now, you could do a branch if you're going to have a swing with somebody swinging. You could show a place where a limb fell off and maybe Brother Squirrel lives in there. You could have a little nest up here, just with a few branches, little twigs, and you can use your end. And then you've got a little bird's nest. All right, now, depending on the seasons, springtime it would probably be very delicate green and just a whisper of it, or maybe even pink if it has pink flower blossoms. But this tree doesn't look like it would have pink fruit blossoms. It looks like it might be an oak or something. So summer, it'd be a wonderful strong green, a very bright and living green. And then of course in autumn you might want to avoid the greens altogether and just have reds and oranges and maybe a little bit of brown. You see I'm using Papa Bear, and I'm making clouds. Remember the clouds from before? I'm putting clouds of yellow right over the branches and off of the branches up above. I'm pressing hard. And you know this tree has a lot of life in it, a lot of life forces. And now I go over it. I was going to go with the red because that's autumn. We're not in autumn yet. And now I can go over it with the blue. And it doesn't have to be the same color green throughout. There can be whoops, now I made that a little too intense, so I'm going to try to cloud over it. And then I'm going to go back over it with the yellow. And it'll be fine. If you look at the trees with the sun shining on them, the leaves up on top tend to be much more yellow because the sun is making them so. and the leaves down underneath are going to be darker because they're more in the shade. So you might want to consider that when you're coloring in your layers, back and forth, back and forth. And see, you can just go right over the branches that you have there. Okay, so this, you don't have to articulate each individual leaf. That's fine. If you want to add apples to it, then you don't have to do a million apples, but you can do tiny little clouds. And they don't all have to be attached to a branch. And there could be some on the ground. Okay. Over here I'm going to plant another kind of tree. And this one would have a stream going by it. So I put the seed, and it starts up. And then the trunk is wider. And this has a very melancholic gesture to it. It starts going up and then it reaches down. And you might recognize this as a willow. Willows, if you want to show the wind, you can make the willow branches all sort of going off in one direction. Go over it a little bit with your yellow. Always be sure you have your roots, and I'll have a little stream here coming by my willow because willows always have to have that water, don't they? And now the yellow, which is going to be the green, and trying to, maybe you can use Mama Bear and get a little bit of that stroke, that gesture of the reaching down. I should have put a little bit more yellow on there, I guess. But this is just to give you an idea. Okay, now on the other side I'm going to show you, I've got my ground line. I'm going to plant one tree. Always plant your seed first. Talk to that. This is a nature lesson for your little ones. You know, you plant the seed in the ground, and Father Sun shines down on it, and Sister Rain rains down on it, and the wind blows over it, and the earth nourishes it, and then a little sprout comes up. And this tree has a very, very straight trunk. And you see, even with this trunk, it started out at an angle and then ended up completely perpendicular. And I imagine you can guess what kind of a tree we have with such a straight trunk. Has a little bit of roots to hold it in the ground. I'm not doing that much with the trunk because actually the trunk is mostly going to be covered up on this tree. Now this one, we dressed the tree differently than we did the other trees because I'm going to start at the top. I'm using Mama Bear Blue, and it starts the same direction as the trunk, and it comes skirting out and skirting out and skirting out. Now they can just bow out like that. I've been looking at a lot of pine trees and seeing that they go out and then they sort of bend down. And you can do some right over the trunk itself. And you can bring it all the way towards the ground, or you can leave it with some trunk there if it's out in the forest and you can make it more like a Christmas tree where it's blue, okay. You go over it then with just a little bit of yellow. But you want to keep it a little bit darker because it's a dark green. It's not a bright spring green. So experiment with that. Your tree is going to look different than mine, but always having it's narrow at the top, of course, with that wonderful pointing up and then coming back down. Now, behind it, you can also just do something where you take this going up, you planted your seed, you've taken it up, and then you can make some smaller ones that sort of hide behind that one. Just the simplest gesture. And it comes with practice. Just practice it and you'll be pleased with the result. And you can even have a smaller one. By showing size relationship, the children are learning a form of perspective without realizing it. You know, something that's smaller will possibly look like it's behind, unless, of course, you show that the trunk is in the foreground. And then here in the background we can have our mountains if you want. Little Yosemite. Okay. Flowers. Do I have room for flowers here? Flowers, since everything is very impressionistic with using the block crayons, we're not doing detail. Things are the impression of things are made, but not the specific. And so if there's a flower garden, you might want to do a little area of a color, such as this. And then have your the greenery underneath it, like this. And just indicate your flowers like that. Unless you're doing just a picture of one flower where you practice that yourself, just create your one blossom and then show the stem and the leaf coming down from there.